on Sarianides, and as always, I'm joined by my partner John Lyons. And joining us once again this week is another guy that I've done some radio with here or there, John Sapochetti. And gentlemen, good Sunday morning to you. How are you guys doing today?
Doing well, John. We got quite a bit to dig into from the Patriots free agency of the first week of it, and it answered some questions, John, but I think there are still some out there lingering that we can get to, and so a lot to get to in this one.
They filled some needs, but I think there's still a lot of question marks, kind of saying pretty much what John Lyons just said as we progress through the second and third stage of free agency, and then if there's potential trades, and then, of course, we got the draft coming up in a little more than a month.
And as always, we welcome you to join the conversation here. Feel free to chime in and share your thoughts with us on what the Patriots did this week in free agency. Do you like what they did? Do you not like what they did? You can also check in and give us your thoughts on a potential A.J. Brown trade. We're going to get to that at the later stages of the show. Of course, that seemingly is a topic of conversation every single week. And as always, we love talking draft. So if you want to get in some early draft conversation, again, feel free to join the show. We are coming to you live on Facebook, X, Twitch, and our YouTube page. So join the conversation. All right, gents, let's start with free agency. I think we all knew, and we previewed free agency last week, and I thought we did an excellent job of nailing some of the players that they ultimately signed. I know, John Lyons, you talked about Draymond Jones. We talked about Elijah Vera Tucker. And those are two guys they signed. Those are really their two big free agents they signed, other than Kevin Byard. And then, of course, they later signed Romeo Doubs. But, look, I thought they had an impressive haul. And I think a lot of people are going to look at what they did and say, okay, did they get better? I think they did. I wrote about this the other day on anyfootballjournal.com. I think this is a better football team now than they were after the Super Bowl. Let's start there. Where do you guys stand on that? Are they a better football team now than they were when they finished the season in Santa Clara?
I think they're a little bit better overall, but I still think there's some question marks, which Sap kind of alluded to before. Like, I like bringing in Reggie Gilliam, which is not going to get a lot of attention, but I think that's going to help their run game a lot. I wonder if a Romeo Doubs at his age is going to give you more than a 33-year-old Stephon Diggs would have given you next year, right? So, like, I do like that signing. I like the Draymond Jones signing a lot, but they lost Caleb Chason and they released Anthony Jennings, which I did not like. And Elijah Vera Tucker, look, if he's healthy, guys, I think he's going to be a great player for them. But he's played half his games in his career. He's had 3 separate seasons derailed by injuries, so you can't bank on that. So, yes, I think they're better, but I still think they have a ways to go if they're really going to get to the level of a team like the Seahawks, or if the Broncos had been fully healthy, as we saw, or some of these other really good, the Rams, some of these good contending teams.
Yeah, they did lose a lot, but they replaced it, and I'd say it's almost like a net zero at this point, right? Because Kevin Byard, I think, is an upgrade over Jalen Hawkins, although we have to see how he fits into the scheme. He did play for Vrabel for 4 or 5 years in Tennessee, and he's coming off leading the NFL in interceptions, which means something. Draymond Jones, I think, is maybe a slight upgrade over Chason, but again, you lost a guy who had 7.5 sacks over there. As far as Romeo Doubs, I like the player. The Green Bay wide receivers don't put up the biggest numbers because they have kind of like a wide receiver by committee. It's an ensemble group at times, and I know Tom Brady has talked about it several times on the broadcast that he was so impressed with the Green Bay wide receiver room because they had 4 or 5 guys that could do a lot of different things, and Romeo Doubs was right in the middle of that. My question mark along the offensive line is, and look, and I was really pushing for Elijah Vera Tucker last week. Now, again, as you said, John Lyons, he's missed about half of his game since he's been in the NFL. He should be an upgrade at left guard over Jaden Wilson, correct?
Yeah,
if
I
healthy.
think so.
Okay.
And
Now,
I think moving Wilson to center helps too.
Okay, that's my big question,
I
guys.
agree.
Now, Garrett Bradbury, who at times got overmatched, but from what John Sarianides has told me, and you too as Lyons, the guy was a leader. He was a smart center, which is what you need at that position, right? I mean, the guy who kind of is the brains of the operation for the most part. And now he's gone. He's with the Bears. They got a 5th-round pick for him. Now you have Jared Wilson moving over to center, where he played at Georgia, second-team All-SEC, which is difficult to do with the SEC. There's usually 5 or 6 guys playing there that end up playing center in the NFL. But is he going to be equipped to be an NFL starting center right now in year 2? And that to me is the big question. If he is, then I think they've improved on the offensive line without question, because Elijah Vera is, high ceiling guy if he's healthy.
Oh, I think they definitely have improved. And the reason I say that is I think that I dealt with Jared Wilson a lot this past season, talked to him a lot after games. He is a smart young man, and he's mature beyond his years. You feel like you're talking to a guy that's 10, 15 years older than his age. So I think based on that, high IQ guy, athletic, he can easily make that transition over to center, and I think play the position at a high level. And yes, I think he will be an upgrade over Garrett Bradbury. Vera Tucker, as you said, Lyons, the big thing with him is the health piece. He's got to stay healthy. If he stays healthy, he is a clear upgrade at left guard over Wilson. He's better equipped physically to play the position. He's athletic. He's strong at the point of attack. He can play in space. He can do a lot of things that the modern NFL guard needs to be able to do at a high level in order to play the position at an all-pro caliber level. I think this guy can do it. Biggest question is going to be, can he stay healthy? That's been a knock on him. But again, he's a guy that when he's played at a consistent Pro Bowl level. Now, as far as the other guys they lost, Draymond Jones, in my opinion, is a clear upgrade over K'Lavon Chaisson. The reason why ultimately Vrabel, Wolf, and this Patriots brain trust, in my opinion, opted not to pay Chaisson long term is they didn't think the sack production was going to be there. And ultimately, at the end of the day, he did a lot of nice things. He was a really good player for them. You can make the case he was probably their best, if not their best defensive player, one of their three best defensive players. But at the end of the day, in today's NFL, 7.5 sacks is not worth 12 to 15 million a year. You need to get more production out of a guy if you're going to pay him that kind of money. And I don't feel, in my opinion, that they felt that he was going to produce enough to warrant that contract. Now, conversely, when you look at Draymond Jones, 27 quarterback hits last year, a much more active player. He is a bigger player than K'Lavon Chaisson. He's more of that old school elephant end. If you remember back when Pete Carroll was here, that's what Willie McGinnis was in that scheme. You're talking about a guy that's 6'3", 280 pounds, that can move all along your front in various packages. He can slide inside in your sub packages. That's what Vrabel wants. He wants that kind of versatility. I think Draymond Jones is going to give them that. And oh, by the way, he's a prick. If you saw it the other day when he met with the media, he plays edge, but he has an edge. And that's what you want on defense. You're hearing the term violence a lot more in football now, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Well, they want guys that are going to play the game violently. Draymond Jones, he's gonna punch you in the face. He's gonna play the game violently. He's gonna play the game the way it should be played. So I love that signing. I love the Dobbs signing. I think he's an upgrade over Diggs from the standpoint of his numbers may not be as good as Diggs last year, but I think he is a 3-level threat, and I think he's a much better player in the red zone. He is going to be one of Drake May's primary targets once you get inside the 20. He's a guy that can separate at the line of scrimmage. He's a guy that can win one-on-one in contested catch situations. And I thought he was supremely underrated in Green Bay. And as a Packers fan, I was hoping they would keep him. They ultimately chose not to. I think he is a guy that could really grow and develop with Drake May and be a really nice piece for them offensively. John, Lyons, I agree with you about Reggie Gilliam. You needed a true fullback. No knock on Jack Westover. I thought he did a nice job, but he wasn't that guy. Gilliam gives you that. Overall, I love what they did. Kevin Byard, I don't love the age of the player, but I still think he knows the system. He wants to play for Vrabel. Obviously, led the league in interceptions last year with 7, so he's still producing. He's only on a 1-year deal. They could potentially bring him back if he's still playing at a high level, but there's not a lot of consequence there in terms of years and money. He's only here on a 1-year deal, so that works. Now, I want to ask you guys this. We talked about this last week. The importance of targeting second contract guys. And they did that. That's who they primarily brought in. And that, to me, is the best way to play things in free agency in the NFL today, is if you can find those guys that fit your schemes, that are going into their second contract, that are in their mid-20s, that are now entering their prime. They were able to add those kinds of guys in Dobbs and Vera Tucker. It's an effective strategy if you can find the right players. Do you think that from a strategic standpoint, they nailed it by targeting these second contract guys.
Yeah, and I think in today's NFL, especially with the fifth-year option in the first round, a lot of the truly great players don't reach free agency. So you kind of have to sign guys
That's a
that
great point.
to use Sap's word from last week, and I think it's a good one, guys that are ascending, that are getting better. Like even Romeo Dobbs, that reminds me a lot of when they signed Kendrick Bourne in 2021. Like that was an under the radar ascending guy in his first year here. He had 800 yards receiving. He was really good until Matt Patricia and Joe Judge decided they didn't like him anymore. But he was really good up until that point. And I think Dobbs is a more talented version of that, but it just reminds me of that. And you can make the case like Draymond Jones is ascending more than Anthony Jennings or Harold Landry or Caleb Chason are and were. So I think in Tucker, same deal. Like that's an ascending player if healthy. Obviously, it's a risk. And one thing that stood out to me too, John, is they've made a concerted effort the last 2 years to get a lot more athletic. Like they tried it a few years back in 2022 with that draft, and it was a bust outside of Marcus Jones. They got Gonzo in 23, but especially last year and this year, they've signed a lot of guys who are high athlete. Like Vera Tucker is a really good athlete. Kevin Byard, I think for 1 year, is a really good athlete to have. Gilliam is a really good athlete. And it's interesting that they are emphasizing, I think, speed and athleticism even more so than they are strength and power. Not that they don't have that, but even guys like Will Campbell and Jared Wilson, we think of them not just as O-linemen, but as really good athletes as well. Travion Henderson at the top of that list for me. So these signings kind of fit with that mold where it feels like they want to really build the fastest and most, and I know Vrabel wants to be physical, but they want the fastest and most athletic team on the field every time they step out there. And it feels like they tried to follow in that mold with at least some of these signings this week.
In terms of Dobbs, and I think I alluded to it early, and Sarianides, as a shareholder of the Green Bay Packers, could probably attest. They have a lot of mouths to feed in Green Bay. So since Devontae Adams left after the 2021 season, they've kind of been receiver by committee. So you have 4 guys, you have 5 guys. Who has 52 catches? Who has 48? Who has 61? Who gets touchdowns? So I think his numbers can be even better here when, in theory, he should be your number 2 wide receiver. I know we're going to talk about what they still need, and I still think they need a true number 1 wide receiver, but that's going to be difficult to execute. But Dobbs is also a player who got this tag of being not reliable. He's only missed 7 games in 4 years, and one of them was a suspension. So he gets hit. He's had concussion issues. He'll go out for a period in the game, maybe a series or 2, but then he comes back. I mean, he's not afraid to go over the middle, catch the ball. I think it's a really, really good signing for the Patriots because, again, he's 6 years younger than Antonio Brown. He seems like a much more chill personality than Antonio Brown. That's for sure. Yeah, Stephon Diggs.
Trayvon
Diggs.
He's younger than that.
Yeah, that's true. There's
even more of an age gap with those two.
Exactly. But with Stephon, I think that you Stephon Diggs, again, you're getting a younger player who doesn't appear to be really problematic off the field. I don't know. Maybe he is, but seems like a really chill, quiet guy who will just go about his business and is a very versatile player. So I do like that signing quite a bit.
Friend of the show, Lauren Gaudet, checks in. She says, I think Byard is the most important signing. The secondary is young, but last year, and he'll bring that experience to teach those young guys. I think he is an important signing. I don't know if I'd stress the young guy piece, though. I don't love the Byard signing as much as other people do. I like it. I like what he brings to the table. The 7 interceptions, to me, don't get me that excited. I don't think it's that big of a deal if you lead the league in interceptions anymore. I know I might get crushed for saying that. I just don't think it is. I think it used to be a more important statistic than it is now. I think when you look at the raw numbers on a player, especially cornerbacks and how they handle elite level receivers, those underlying numbers, in my opinion, are more important. I do get where Lauren is coming from with the experience piece because you got Craig Woodson. I don't know if I'd call Christian Gonzalez inexperienced anymore. Carlton Davis certainly doesn't need mentorship. He's been around the league for a while. I like the signing. My only concern is I think Jalen Hawkins was supremely underrated in this defense last year. And I think where they're going to lose a little something here is his ability to cover ground over the top, especially either as a single high safety or when he rotated over the top. He was exceptional in that area last year, and he could cover a lot of ground, and he had plus ball skills where he could get up and not only defend passes, but potentially pick them off and come down with them. We saw that in the Cleveland game. He had a terrific interception along their sideline. So I think that they're going to lose a little in terms of safety range with him gone. I don't think Byard has the range he does. I do think Byard gives you more in run support and playing downhill, and he's also really good as a short area pass defender. But I get what Lauren is saying. Veteran guy, Pro Bowl caliber player, been around, knows Vrabel, knows the system. There's not much to not like about the signing, but I do think they lose a little bit something. Hawkins is younger, and I think he's a rangier player.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of when the Texans signed Jimmy Ward when D'Amico Ryans took over, because it was a guy that knew his defense, veteran. He was actually 32 as well at the time. And obviously, Vrabel's already been here a year, so it's not exactly the same. But a lot of the things you said, John, I tend to agree with. Like, I think for 1 year, Kevin Byard is an upgrade at safety. But if you're asking me who would I have rather have kept, like if I could have signed Hawkins for 3 or 4 years, I would have kept Hawkins. I think, again, he was better in the deep part of the field. And you mentioned the interception against Cleveland. He had a great one against the Raiders in week 1. I know they didn't win that game, but like an athletic guy who could make plays. And we saw when he wasn't in the lineup against New Orleans, they gave up big plays when he wasn't in the lineup. They had some issues against Atlanta when he wasn't in the line. Like when he wasn't out there, they had issues on defense. So it's one of those things that for 1 year, and maybe to help a Craig Woodson, to help a Del Pettis, I get it, and I like it in that sense, but they still need to bring in, to me, another safety or draft another. Like they need another young, unless they think Del Pettis is the strong safety of the future and Craig Woodson's the free safety of the future. Maybe they do, but it feels like this is a 1 year thing, maybe 2 at the most. So that's where you lose out. And I think Byard's going to be good for them, but I think there'll be some times where they miss Jalen Hawkins this year.
Can it be a case that obviously it's a 1 year deal for $9 million? Hawkins got 2 at $5 million a year, so you're spending a little bit more money for 1 year, but just a case that Mike Vrabel wanted his guy, that he had a great relationship with Kevin Byard. Byard did a lot of good things with him at Tennessee. Byard played well last year. But the only question I have is, why is Chicago moving on from him? Are they just...
I think that's a great question. And to go back to your point, Sap, I get the whole you want your guy thing. Jalen Hawkins bought in from day one.
Right.
Man. He bought in from day one. He loved playing here. He was great in the locker room. He checked off every box. I don't know how much more you can ask for a player and get from a player than you got from Jalen Hawkins last year. So I get what you're saying about wanting your guy, but man, Jalen Hawkins was his guy. He bought in. Those are the guys you keep, and he's younger. I don't get that part of it.
And I think, too, again, I have to ask why Chicago's moving on. They're in a win-now situation, right? I mean, they keep adding to the offense to give everything for Caleb Williams. They're the reigning NFC North Division champs. I've talked with Sarianides many times, Lyons. I think Jacksonville and Chicago are the two teams most likely to fall back this year because both of those teams won on turnovers. When you have like a plus 18 or a plus 20 in turnovers, generally the next year you're not the same. That's why I was impressed with what the Patriots did. They went 14-3, and they were only plus 3 in turnovers. That is sustainable. So why are you moving on from a guy who led the league in interceptions and you've kind of redone your entire secondary? That's a question I have. But again, the Chicago Bears over the years have made a lot of mistakes, so maybe you shouldn't give them that much credit.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think at the end of the day, again, he did everything you asked him to. And I think that's my issue with this whole thing is that to Lyons' point, he's a younger player. He fit your scheme well. Your defense, from a coverage standpoint, wasn't the same when he was out in that New Orleans game. I think, again, one of the problems the Patriots had in recent years at the safety position, going back to Belichick, was after Devin McCourty, they didn't have that safety that could play over the top and had that range you want in terms of a single high guy that can play both sides of the field or rotate over the top and play both sides of the field. They didn't have that guy. They had it with McCourty, hadn't had it since. And now that you finally do get that guy, and a guy, by the way, who's a Cal guy who clicked with Woodson, they played together in college, they knew each other. Again, a locker room leader, a guy that bought, he was all in on your culture shift. I don't know why you move away from that guy. And again, Baltimore gave him a 2-year, $10 million deal. You could have easily given him that and more. I don't know why you moved away from that guy to bring in Byard, who, again, I know you like him. He's, quote, one of your guys. You trust him. But this was my fear going into this offseason, guys, and I've said this to both of you at various points. especially towards the end of the season. I did not want them to become the Commanders in the sense that they started to bring in these third, fourth contract veterans that they viewed as the final piece that could get us over the top. But in essence, they're guys that are short-term guys that could be potentially more injury prone, and they don't grow with your young nucleus, which is what I think this team needs. They need those second contract guys that can grow with their young nucleus. I like the Byard signing in the sense that I like the player, but he's going to have to play at a really high level. And not that it matters what I think, but he's going to have to play at a really high level to show me that he is a clear upgrade over Jalen Hawkins.
Yeah, and part of me wonders, do they view Craig Woodson as the guy that's going to be the deep free safety? Did some of that at Cal.
Yeah, it could be.
But my disagreement there is I thought he was tremendous in the box hybrid safety role last year. I mean, in the Super Bowl, he was dominant itself, but he was really good all year coming downhill against the run in the short and intermediate area. So I think he has the skill set to be the deep safety. It's just I thought he was really good in the role he had. And then, but like I said before, I wonder if they're grooming it for Craig Woodson's the deep safety, Del Pettis or someone else in 2 years is the box safety. And they're just because it feels like to me, and John, you and I have talked about this for months. I think we can say Vrabel is a 3-corner nickel guy instead of a 3-safety nickel guy, especially with Marcus Jones as the third corner. That bore itself out this year. So you're really looking
at a lot of nickel. They were top 5 in the league.
Right. And it was primarily Marcus Jones out there as the third guy, not Del Pettis as the third guy. So I think we're going to see them play 3-corner nickel as long as Marcus Jones is here, at least maybe more. So you're really only looking for 2 safeties at that point. But again, Kevin Byard for 1 year is a good player. I think he will be an upgrade on your defense. Over the course of 2 or 3 or 4 years, though, I'd rather have Jalen Hawkins here. And I think he's going to have a really good year in Baltimore next to Kyle Hamilton as well.
Maybe he'll feel his physical and come back to the Patriots,
That's true.
Yeah,
Baltimore's
I doubt
good
that's going to happen.
Yeah.
No, and I think, look, and I know sometimes you put too much of an emphasis on this, but I really do think you lost. The one area that I think they lost a little something in this week is that locker room presence piece. It is that locker room leadership piece. Those guys all bought in. All the guys that walked out that door. Of course, they cut Tavai, they cut Jennings, which I want to get into here in a sec. But those guys all bought in. And I'm not saying you run it back. Clearly, running it back wasn't the right move because they weren't good enough to win it all. That bore out in the Super Bowl. But I felt coming into free agency that Hawkins was the one guy that you really needed to work to keep. I wasn't going to overpay Chase on. I just wasn't. And I understood, again, as I said earlier, why they ultimately chose not to go down that road with him. But in the case of Hawkins, the guy's in his late 20s, would have been a third contract guy, but he's playing at a high level. You could probably sign him to a 3-year deal, have him for another 3 years. He fits your scheme. He proved that. Sure, I think, Lyons, you make a great point. Maybe they thought Woodson can be that guy, and he could. He certainly proved to be that guy at Cal. But in the end, and maybe that's what they're going for here, having Byard more as a box safety. Woodson now can be that rotating over-the-top guy. My guess is that's what they're shooting for, and I think that's how it's going to play out in terms of player usage. But I thought that Hawkins was a guy that they should have retained. Ken Matthias checks in. He says, "Hey, gents, good morning. How would you rate the Patriots free agency class 1 through 10? AD, what signing is most intelligent?" I'm not going to get into the letter grades here, but I would say that I like what they did. I'd give him a 7. I mean, I'm not. The Gilliam signing is important based on the way you want to play. The Julian Hill signing, you signed KJ Britt, who I think could be a nice sub-package linebacker, special teamer. But overall, I'd say I'd give it a 7.
Yeah, I'd give it like a B overall because, again, I like Draymond Jones a lot. I like Reggie Gilliam. And Romeo Doubs I like, but I still feel like he's a good player. He's not a number 1 in a really good or great offense to me in the passing game. He's a really good number 2. If he's your number 2 receiver, you're cooking in the pass game. If he's your number 1, I think you're pretty good, but, there's a ceiling there. And Vera Tucker, we talked about it. There's a lot to like there. I mean, in 2024, he was one of the best guards in the NFL. But he missed all 2020. There's a big injury risk there. So I think that's the issue, is that there's some risk here. And some of that is the natural course of free agency. There's always going to be risk, but it feels like, yes, they've gotten better, but they still have work to do if they're really going to reach that level of, one of those true teams. Because again, yeah, they went to the Super Bowl. It's harder to go there a second year in a row, or 2 years from now, go there 2 out of 3 years. They still have some work to do to get to that level, I think.
I think I'd give it a B as well. They did some really nice things, but it is still not mystifying, but it's going to be what we see over the next couple of weeks or even the next couple months, what they do with other needs, which shows that they still had a lot of needs to fill, even though they are the defending AFC champions. And I think this is a case with most every NFL team. There's no perfect team out there. I mean, you can see Seattle now is going to have to fill some gaps, losing free agents, right? I mean, so that's what the NFL is all about at this point. My only question with Draymond Jones, and you guys can answer this better than I, any concern that he's now on his 5th team in a pretty short period of time?
No, I think not in my opinion.
Yeah. So Sap, normally I would be, but I think he would have stayed in Tennessee if they weren't so bad. Like, they traded him to try to recoup. And actually, by the way, I thought he was better in Baltimore after the trade. Had 32 pressures there after the trade, 51 total on the season. But normally, Sap, I would agree with you. I think, though, he would still be in Tennessee if they weren't so bad. I think they traded him for a purpose, not because they didn't want him there.
Yeah, I agree. You got to remember the other thing with Draymond, with Draymond Jones is he started his career as a defensive tackle. He lost weight and slowly but surely started playing on the outside more as a defensive end edge. So I think that's part of it. I think he was transitioning to that part of his career where he went from being a defensive tackle to a guy that was playing the 5 tech, playing outside. And I think ultimately teams were having a hard time figuring out how to use him. I think Tennessee I thought Denard Walker did a really nice job there with the way he used him. To Lyons' point, I think they ultimately trade him from a value standpoint because they were bad and they wanted to get picks. They traded him to Baltimore, and he was really good in Baltimore. And I think that's the player, as a Patriots fan, that's the player that I hope to see. And I think that is the player Patriot fans are going to see, the guy that they saw in Baltimore. And again, he is a terrific scheme fit. He knows Vrabel. Vrabel places a premium on relationships and backgrounds with guys. And I think he's another one of those guys. Of course, he was the first free agent that the Patriots signed. Lauren Gaudette checks in. She says, Hawkins signed a 2-year, $10 million deal. Was Pats going to match that, or did they not have plans to sign him? No, I don't think it came down to money. They had the money to sign him. I don't think that it was a money thing. I think what it came down to, and I agree with Lyons on this, I think it came down to scheme fit. I think ultimately they believe that Craig Woodson can play over the top more in that free safety role, and Kevin Byard could be more of that strong safety type. The Byard signing reminds me a lot of the Rodney Harrison signing in 2003. I think it's that kind of signing where you're bringing him in, as we talked about earlier, and it was brought up earlier by you, Lauren, about the leadership piece. You're bringing him in. He's going to bring leadership. He's going to bring some pedigree. But here's the thing. Like Rodney Harrison, he didn't have that championship pedigree or that experience. He's hoping to gain that here. But what he does bring is an edge. He brings an attitude, and he brings a presence to your locker room. And let's not forget, Vrabel played with Rodney Harrison. I'm sure that if you asked him, he probably sees a lot of those same qualities in Kevin Byard.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I don't. Kevin Byard's a 3-time first-team All-Pro. I think Rodney Harrison's one of the best safeties of all time. So I don't want to put him quite in that class.
No, I'm not saying.
But I understand.
I
understand what you're saying in like the fit in the Vrabel thing for sure. And I think we haven't really touched on this yet. Draymond Jones is an upgraded edge, and I understand if they wanted to pick him over Chase on. I don't like that they let Anthony Jennings go on top of it. I thought they misused Anthony Jennings this year. That guy is a good run defender on the edge. He's not a great pass rusher, I know, but there's still value to have that run defender on the edge, especially with Harold Landry's health being inconsistent on edge as well. That was a guy that was experienced, that had been here, that had been through the bad times, by the way, in 2023 and 24, and then was part of the rebuild that got them to the Super Bowl this year. So it felt like that was another case of a guy that they could have kept Jennings around. They could have kept Hawkins around. They could have kept Chase on. Like, those are three conscious decisions that they didn't want. That, much like last offseason when they let Jonathan Jones and Jawan Bentley go, those were conscious decisions. They said, we'll be fine without those guys. We'll see if it's proven. Like, I still think their defense is going to be really good, but we'll see if it's proven out if they're okay with all those guys. And you can add in, Jack Gibbons as well, who's a free agent, right? Like, conscious decision to not bring some of these guys back on a defense that was really good last year. Again, I like Draymond Jones. I still think they got some work to do there defensively, though.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Lyons on that point, and I know you do too, John Sarianides. There's still some holes, whether they're depth pieces or starters or impact players, whatever they may be. But there's still time. There's still some talent out there. There's also the trade market, and then we're going to talk about A.J. Brown in a bit. And then there's also the draft, of course, where, if you can hit on a couple of those picks, now you fill in some of the gaps, whether they're a depth piece or an impact piece.
Yeah, it's interesting because somebody had mentioned to me this week, they said, man, how's he letting all these guys walk? Of course, they released Jelani Tavai. They've released Anthony Jennings. Doesn't appear they're going to re-sign Jack Gibbons. And somebody asked me, they said, how is he letting all these guys, how is he cutting these guys or letting these guys walk? I mean, they were such a big part of this team last year, and the defense played well, and so much for the culture and him shaking everybody's hand as they're coming into the locker room after games. And I'm like, it's a business. At the end of the day, it's a business. And all that stuff looks good, and it's genuine. I'm not saying that Vrabel's putting on a show. It's real, but at the end of the day, it's a business. And if you're going to win football games, let's not forget, he's not Bill Belichick, but he comes from that Bill Belichick tree from the standpoint of he played for him. He saw the formula for success here. Doesn't matter that he didn't coach for him. He saw the formula of success here. And in a lot of ways, Vrabel knows that your best shot of sustained success is turning the roster over, trying to get younger, trying to stay younger, and not getting attached to players. He knows this firsthand because he played in the league. So he knows that it's a business. At the end of the day, yes, you're going to form relationships. Another guy we didn't talk about, Kairos Tonga. He walks out the door, goes to Kansas
City. That's a real loss, by the way.
Yeah.
Like,
on a 3-year, $21 million deal.
He was really good as a run defender. And you saw when he wasn't on the field, they had trouble with runs up the middle. And that's something they're going to have to replace, whether it's they bring in a space-eating rookie or there's another under-the-radar free agent, much like Tonga, that we're not thinking of, that they bring in this year. But, like, that's a real loss. I think that they're going to have to figure out a way because, again, as much as I like Milton Williams, as much as I like Christian Barmore, Tonga was at times a better run defender than both of them last year, especially Barmore. So it's just that to me, that's an under the radar one, but that's a real loss.
That was a surprise to me, only because you need depth at that position, and we still don't know what they're going to do with Christian Barmore. I mean, if they didn't re-sign Tonga, which is what they didn't do, it seems like he's coming back. Right.
He's here next year.
The telltale sign is Tonga was let to go. Yep.
Well, they picked up the $12 million
right
next year.
So right.
He's here next year.
He's here, but you still need another person in there for depth.
Well, you got Farmer, and he played. I thought he played well when he played. You got Corey Durden, who they really like. They're not devoid of depth there. I liked Kairos Tonga covering him, and I do see what Lyons is saying in terms of his value, but I don't think he's some crippling loss that can't be replaced. And I'm not giving him $7 million a year. Like, Kansas City overpaid for him. No, I'm glad the guy got the bag. He's a class act. Enjoyed being around the guy. But again, I'm not giving him $7 million a year. And in the case of Kayvon Chason, going back to him, he got $12 million on a 1-year deal from the Commanders. Now, I don't know what the problem is in terms of the league's perception of Chason. Being around him last year, I thought he was a great teammate. I thought he was super productive for them. I thought he should have gotten a longer-term deal. But what does that say about him that he sat on the market for 3 days and the Commanders gave him a 1-year, $12 million deal? I mean, I think what it says, in my opinion, is that there's people around the league that still see him as a bust. Right or wrong, they don't see him as a player that they can build around defensively.
Yeah, and I think Chason, correct me if I'm wrong, third team in 3 years, right? Or something like that. So it's something he has. And look, I think Draymond Jones is better than Kayvon Chason. Like, that's an upgrade. What, just like I said, my concern is you didn't just lose Chason. You lost Chason and Jennings, plus Landry had a debilitating injury later in the season. Like that. So yes, you have one upgrade, but I still think like I'm not going to be surprised if their first round pick is at edge or their second round pick is at edge.
It should be. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not. That's not going to surprise me at all. And it's the same thing. Like again, I like Joshua Farmer and Durden too. I like Tonga a lot. Like yes, the guys they brought in are upgrades. It's just especially at edge. I think right now they've lost more than they've brought in. You know, just again, sheer numbers wise, that to me is the position I think they probably still that and receiver for a big upgrade is probably where they still have the most work to do.
I spoke to a scout who told me that if they don't draft an edge at 31, assuming they stick and pick, if they don't draft an edge at 31, it would be one of the bigger upsets of the draft.
Yeah, especially with how deep like that late first round edge group should be good. Like you should get a good player there at 31. Yeah. So yeah, I'm with you. Like I think unless there's some crazy thing, like if Kenyon Sadiq falls and he's at 26 and they can trade up, fine, okay, I would do that. But like otherwise, yeah, I think you gotta as of now, unless something changes, like edge is probably going to be their first round pick.
And edge is probably the deepest position in the draft, correct?
Yeah,
it is. Yeah. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, the other thing is, the thing with the draft is you do get your curveballs, like you said, Lyons. If a Kenyon Sadiq somehow falls, which I don't think he's going to fall that far, but if he did,
I don't think so either. But yeah,
you could potentially the maneuver up to get him. They certainly have the capital to do it. Or if he falls to you, you take him at 31 and you chalk it up to too great a value to pass up, a la Vince Wilfork in 2004. Or if you don't go edge and somebody like a Monroe Freeling is sitting there and they really like him, and I've talked to a couple of people that told me they do like him, potentially you take him as a future right tackle to replace Morgan Moses down the road. But I don't think they're going to do that. I really think as long as if somebody like a Zion Young rather is sitting there at 31, that's a guy that's a strong bet to be the pick. He fits that scheme to a T. He's a guy that can play all three downs. He plays with an intensity and an edge to him. He plays violent like they want their guys to play on defense. So I mean, again, I would be shocked if they didn't go edge there. Lori checks back in. She says, I think losing Tonga is probably the biggest long-term loss. I wonder about Barmore's health as well. I couldn't disagree more. It is not their biggest long-term loss. Lauren, I think the world of you, but that is an overstatement if there ever was one.
Yeah, I think Hawkins is probably their
these days?
biggest long-term loss. Yeah, I'd say it's probably of the guys they've lost. I'd say it's probably Hawkins, given his age and all the nice things we said about him earlier. But yeah, like that again. I think Tonga's a loss, but I think Hawkins. If we're talking 3 or 4 years from now, I think that's a bigger long-term one.
Sometimes we just think that when we lose a player like Tonga, who's so popular with the fans, and like you said, John Sarianides, he was a joy to deal with, that you like the person so much, you don't want him to leave. But as you said, it is a business. So if he's getting $7 million a year from Kansas City, and the Patriots decided he maxes out at $5 million a year, they're not going to go to $7 million a year because they've got big contracts very quickly coming up with Christian Gonzalez, and then next year with Drake May, and those are going to be mega contracts. We're talking close to 90 to 100 million combined for those two players if you want to retain them.
And I think, look, again, I like the person, I like the player. I'm just not paying him $7 million a year. I'm just not. You're talking about a third defensive tackle here who those guys play a lot of snaps. Don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. And Lyons, I agree with you wholeheartedly. He was vitally important to their run defense this season. But again, this is why the Kansas City Chiefs, who did a really good job under Brent Veach of managing the cap, have now become a team that almost acts like as if they're drunk when they're signing guys and don't know how to manage the cap. This is why they've had cap problems the last couple of years, because you're giving out contracts like this. It just doesn't make sense to me. And again, I think that the league probably views Tonga pretty favorably now, especially after what he did last season. But I think that, and there was Andrew Callahan of the Boston Herald reported, him and Doug Kyde reported, that at the Combine they had almost reached an agreement, but then it fell apart. And once it fell apart, they never came back to the table. Well, I think, at least from what I'm speculating here, I think it probably fell apart because, to Lyons' point, they weren't coming in at $7 million a year. They probably came to the table with 3-year 15 or 3-year $18 million deal, and he wanted more, and they walked away.
Yeah, and that's where like we've talked all year and really going back to last offseason about depth and how the Patriots needed to add depth and how they got away with not having as much depth this season because they remain remarkably healthy for the year. And I think when you look at some of these signings, like Jones is a starter, Tucker is a starter, Gilliam is going to be, maybe not a technical starter, but play a lot of snaps. Same with Dobbs and Byard. I still think they're missing that depth piece to a degree. And I wonder if they'll use, they have 11 draft picks. I don't know if they're going to use all 11, but it wouldn't surprise me if they draft 9 guys for depth. Or we see a few more signings, kind of under the radar ones, the next week or two. Because I think you can make a case that Jones is an upgrade over Chason. Dobbs will be a long-term upgrade over Diggs, right? Tucker will be an upgrade over Wilson, especially when you move Wilson to center. It's just you're still, I think, missing some of that depth piece there. And also, I think their player development program is going to be really on the clock this offseason. You had a ton of guys in their first or second year be major contributors on the team last year. Those guys are going to have to get better. Like Campbell and Wilson have to get bigger and stronger and better. Henderson has to be more consistent. Kyle Williams has to give you some outside of Craig Woodson, all the young guys have room to grow. And I think their player development system, that's going to be a big part of this, maybe even more so than for a lot of other teams that go deep in the playoffs because the Patriots are so young.
Will Campbell's going to be the player we watch so much in training camp to see how he comes back from his knee surgery that he, probably went through at the end of the season, or if he even had knee surgery. I'm not even aware of it, but he's coming back from obviously some damage to that.
He didn't have
knee.
surgery during the season. No.
He didn't have surgery during the season. No, they held off so he could come back and play. He's obviously was compromised at that point. We'll see how he continues to develop. The question I have is, how much better will it be? And I know, I'm sure he had a great relationship with Jaden Wilson, but how important is it that now he has a veteran next to him on the right side and Elijah Vera Tucker, provided Vera Tucker is healthy? That has to be a good thing to help him out.
Vera Tucker's 26. He's played in the league
4 years.
He's not one of these grizzled guys that is 30, 32 years old and has seen it all, right? So I think that a lot was made of that, but I'm not banking on any of that. For me, with Vera Tucker, it's about the player. Mm-hmm. I think he can, if he stays healthy, he's going to be a good player for them, and I think he fits the scheme. That's where I like that signing. I'm not expecting Vera Tucker, who's 3 years older than him, to come in and show him the ropes. Like, I think that was overstated. So, but I do want to come back to the guys that cut before we go into wide receiver talk and a couple of other items. Jelani Tavai, Anthony Jennings, guys that were here during the tail end of Belichick's time. They played for Mayo, played a year for Vrabel. Ultimately, look, they were good locker room guys, good soldiers last year, but at the end of the day, it probably comes down to money and scheme fit as to why they're not here anymore. And I agree with you, Lyons. I think the draft is really where they're going to rebuild their depth. But I do think ultimately, how much does that affect the culture? You let those guys walk out the door, and I briefly mentioned it earlier, but we never really got into it. Culture is a big part of what Vrabel talks about, and it's a big part of his program. But how much does losing those guys, and let's face it, those guys were scarred. They went through the 4-13 seasons. They lived through that. They had the scars to prove it. How much does losing those guys affect this football team in 2026 from a leadership locker room standpoint?
So the Tavai one, I don't think is as big a deal. I was never a huge believer in him. I thought he was always, if he was your third linebacker, you would feel really good. But there were times where he was their top linebacker or their second backer. And I thought that, to me, that's, a role player type guy. The Jennings one bothers me more for the reasons I talked about earlier, where good run defender at a position where you already had lost a guy in Chason. You have a guy with uncertain health in Landry. I think the back-to-back 4-13 season thing, it's not the be-all and end-all, but I think there's some value there because you don't want some of the young guys to think, oh, hey, we came in the league and went to the Super Bowl and it's that easy. I think there's some value to having a guy that went through bad seasons. And one thing I'm curious to get your guys' thought on, do you think there's a little bit too much of a reliance on guys that are quote-unquote scheme fits? And what I mean by that, I think if you're a good coaching staff, which I think they are, you should be able to find a way to use most good players. So if you tell me Jennings isn't a quote-unquote scheme fit, Well, can you not find ways to use a player that's that good? Same thing with Jalen Hawkins, like a player that's bought in, that's that productive. Like, I understand not everyone is going to fit their scheme, but I'm worried. Are they starting to get to a point where they rely a little too much on guys that are scheme fits, and they won't go outside the box at all to get guys that maybe aren't a perfect fit for their scheme, but in certain roles or certain situations, or just too talented, are worth bringing in, anyway.
Well, to your point, we look at a player like Brian Thomas, who I'm stumping for them to acquire. We talked about it last week. First year at Jacksonville, he was right with Malik Neighbors as the best rookie wide receiver in football. Coaching change last year, he seemed lost. Scheme fit, right? Well, if a guy's that good, can you figure out a way to use him? And maybe that's going to benefit the Patriots at this point if Jacksonville moves on from him. So, yeah, I see what you're saying, Lyons. And I also think that in the NFL, we just see change for change's sake quite a bit. I mean, it's like, okay, we're going to move on from this guy. We know what he gives us, but maybe we're more intrigued by this other player who we all think is similar or on the same talent level, but the coaching staff thinks they can do more with. I think that that's a big part of what happens in free agency and to a lesser degree, the draft.
Well, I think it's staying one step ahead.
Right.
And a lot of it is future projection and where's a player going to be in 2 or 3 years from now? And do you want to pay that player? What are they going to look like?
Mhm.
I think the scheme fit thing does matter. It is important. But I also think that it also comes down to whether or not they're a fit in the locker room and they're fit culturally. And obviously, look, Anthony Jennings is a fit culturally. We all agree with that. But Anthony Jennings was never a high-end pass rusher. He wasn't that player at Alabama. At Alabama, for the first 2 years of his college career, he's an off-ball linebacker who played Sam and then played Will and Mike and moved around depending on packages. And then Saban started using him more as an on-the-ball linebacker coming off the edge. So he was never some elite level pass rusher. And when we talk about scheme fit, yeah, he was a better scheme fit in Belichick's style of defense as a closed end than he is in this defense as a closed end. Because again, it's a skill set thing. And I think ultimately it does matter. Scheme fit matters. And I think at the end of the day, a player may fit your scheme better than another's. But beyond the scheme fit piece, even if you could get the player to play in your scheme, do you need to pay that player at that position when you can get another guy for less money to do what he does for you in your scheme? You mentioned Brian Thomas. Yeah, sure. Brian Thomas can play in any scheme, but in the West Coast offense, do you really need to pay a guy 20, 25 million a year down the road to play wide receiver for you when you can get almost similar production out of a guy who may not have the name, cachet, or the talent, but can do similar things and you can still get something out of him in your offense? So I think sometimes we lose sight of that, but I think that's more the reality. I don't think Anthony Jennings is going to be a loss for them. I think you probably got about as much juice as you can get out of that lemon. But I think at the end of the day, this is part of that reset, right? We talked about this last offseason. That first wave was going to be Jones, was going to be Wise, those veteran guys, Andrews, that were around here for most of the tail end of Belichick's time. And now it's about moving out. Then last season, you traded Duggar. You didn't bring back Peppers. You moved on from the guys that were linked to Mayo. Now you're moving on from the guys that were linked to both of those times. And now this does matter to coaches, fellas. This can now be Mike Vrabel's team with Mike Vrabel's guys that he brought in that he wanted here. Whether or not you agree with it, that's how it works in football, really at every level.
And I definitely hear that, and I agree. And I don't want them to go too far in the like we'll get our own guys over guys that are really good. And I'm not saying they're going to do that. I just think that sometimes is a trap that coaches and GMs and teams fall into. So they're going to have to work to avoid that to an extent. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, I mean, this was always going to be a like it sounds ridiculous to say they got to the Super Bowl, but they're still not finished rebuilding the roster. Like this was going to be a multi-year thing all along, even till, and I think I talked about this last week on the show, a lot of people compared this team to the 0-1 team. The 0-1 team scored 13 points on offense. They just won the Super Bowl because they got a pick six too. But when they won the Super Bowl in 03, a lot of different guys there than in 01. The core was the same, but there was a lot of guys they brought in 02 and 03 that were totally different guys than the 01 team. So I know people have compared this team to that. So I know it sounds kind of crazy. They got to the Super Bowl, but they're still not done rebuilding this roster. And that's why we talked about it early on. This is one of those pivot point off seasons. Are you going to elevate to be a true contender, or are you going to stay where you are?
You guys coach the sport. I don't. Can I throw this out to you? Coaches have types, shall we say, certain types of players that they prefer over other types of players. We always knew Belichick liked those big, strong linebackers. Sarianides, you like a quarterback that's 6'3", 6'4", that can stand in the pocket and deliver from there. John Lyons, you may have a certain type of player you like at wide receiver. Whatever the case, maybe you have certain types that you want to fill your team with.
I don't think it's. I mean, whatever.
I think it varies by
that,
position.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, I mean, I think you can't have a quarterback that's 5'11".
Yeah. I don't give a shit what they look like.
I'm not saying look like. I'm just saying what they offer with their skill sets.
Yeah.
I don't
think
care
it
about
varies. That. Yeah. I think like even at receiver, like I want one or two big bodied receivers, but then I want one or two little guys that can work the middle and intermediate areas. So it's like, I think it depends positionally. One thing though, you did bring up linebacker. That is a difference with Vrabel than it was with Belichick and even with Mayo. They are a little bit, quote unquote, smaller, more athletic with their linebackers than they used to be.
Yeah. And it's also 20 years later when the game has changed a lot since 03, 04.
Well, and again, to go back to your original question, I mean, I want guys that fit what we want to do and the way we want to play, but at the same time, I don't think that's the end all be all. I mean, if I don't have a quarterback who's 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", and I have a guy who's 5'11", 6 feet, well, then I got to make it work with that guy. End of story. It's on me to adjust the way I coach and what I do to maximize that player and get more out of him. So I think at the end of the day, yes, you have preferred types physically, but you're not always going to get those guys. So in the NFL, you can get those guys. In this day and age, with the portal now in college football, you could potentially get those guys. But it's not always the case, even at those levels, that you're gonna be able to get those guys that fit the way you want to play schematically and physically, and they can be productive players for you. And I think, look, I get where Lyons is coming from. I don't want to see them be totally reliant on scheme fits either. You got to think outside the box and bring in football players, guys that can develop in your scheme and help you win games. But I do think different philosophies, different schemes fit different players. And I think at the end of the day, yes, to Lyons' point about the Patriots wanting to be more athletic on linebacker, they don't value a Dante Hightower like a Bill Belichick would. They would rather a Robert Spillane, a guy that can play all three downs, can cover underneath, can carry some routes vertically, depending on who the offensive player is. That's what they value. So I think, again, that's an important part of it. But I do think clearing the decks was part of their plan this offseason. Again, it was a feel-good story last year. You got to Super Bowl 60. It was nice. You're ahead of schedule in a lot of ways, but at the same time, you want to try to establish your own culture fully and have a certain identity. You want to do it with your guys. It's just the nature of the business. And by the way, that's how it is in all sports. It's not just a football thing. I do want to bring up A.J. Brown because there was a story yesterday on Pro Football Talk by Mike Florio that the Eagles are going to trade A.J. Brown and that the likely destination is the Patriots. As we've talked about all along, and again, when you talk to people around here, sometimes it's like banging your head against the wall. They don't listen. The Eagles were never going to take the kick in the nuts financially and trade him before June 1st. But now it appears that they're going to move on from him after June 1st. And the likely destination is the Patriots. What do you guys make of that report? Do you buy it? Do you think it's realistic? And we're piggybacking, by the way, off of Matthias's question here, which is, do we think that they're going to sign another wide receiver or free agent wide receiver, or will they bring back Diggs? I don't think they're bringing back Diggs. I know that Wolf kind of kept that door slightly open the other day when he met with the media, but I don't buy it. I think Diggs is done. He's one and done.
I think you'll see an A.J. Brown trade after June 1st for two reasons. One, the financial aspect for the Eagles, but the other one, and this hasn't been talked about enough, I think the Eagles would much rather have the Patriots' first round pick in 2027 than they would in 2026 for a couple reasons. One, the 2027 draft, I think, is going to have more top end talent, especially at receiver if they're looking for a long term replacement for A.J. Brown. But the other reason is the Patriots are picking at 31. Odds are, as much as we might want them to, they're not going to go to the Super Bowl 2 years in a row. So that first round pick will be higher than 31. So I think this is a post June 1st trade because the financial aspect for the Eagles, but also, I think they're going to view the Patriots' first round pick in 2027 as more valuable than the pick they would get if they did it now, and it was the 2026 pick at 31 overall.
I'm still not enamored with sending a first round pick to Philadelphia
Yeah,
for
me
AJ
neither.
Brown. I'm not, especially if it's next year's first round pick and the Patriots are 9-8 and the pick is pick 16. That's much more value than this year. Could it be possible that they get him for a second and a fourth and maybe a fifth comes back with him to the Patriots? Then I would do that. Yes, I would do that. But if I'm going to move a first round pick for a wide receiver, it's going to be Brian Thomas Jr. because of his age. And I think the player is a player that, is ascending, my favorite word, right, Lyons? Rather than AJ Brown, who, again, I think those big wide receivers, I don't know how he's going to age. I don't know.
Yeah. Two things. One, Jacksonville's not trading you Brian Thomas. So get that thought out of your head. They're not trading him in the conference. That ain't going to happen. And two, I think I agree with you, Sap. I'm not trading a first round pick this year, next year, any year at this point for AJ Brown. I'm not doing it. I'm just not doing it. And our good friend Kevin Stone was on the Sports Hub yesterday, and he talked about how he would give up pick 31. That's just flat out idiotic. I'm not trading pick 31 or any pick in the first round for AJ Brown. Because to Sap's point, I don't think he's going to age well. I don't think he's going to be the same player. You're already starting to see it statistically with him a little bit. And while, yes, he'll be rejuvenated coming here, reuniting with Vrabel, playing for his favorite childhood team, all this other good stuff, while that will give him a spark, and I do think you can get a couple of good years out of him potentially, even a second round pick for me is I'm on the fence, especially next year. Let's say hypothetically they went 9-8, and that's a middle of the second round pick. You really going to give up that pick for AJ Brown? I know people are going to say, "Come on, dude, you're pushing it now. AJ Brown's going to be better than any player that they're going to get there." That's not the point. The point is you can get a potential starter there for one. Two, this is a young man's game. You've got to keep turning the roster over. It's not about getting guys and acquiring guys long term that are in their late 20s, early 30s, or mid 30s. It's about trying to accumulate as much young talent as you can. That's where I'm coming from. You build through the draft, in my opinion, in the NFL. And I think at the end of the day, do I like the idea of A.J. Brown and the Patriots? 100%. I'm sure Edelman will give him his blessing and he'll wear number 11 and all this other good stuff. But I think at the end of the day, if the Eagles are willing to have a conversation about a third and a fifth, a third and a sixth, with no pick coming back other than A.J. Brown, yeah, then let's talk. I'd even consider a late second round pick, but I'm not. I don't know if I'm putting that offer on the table. I think that if you're the Patriots, you want to continue to add to this young nucleus. Best way to do that is through the draft.
So I'm open to dealing a first round pick for Brown if it's a 1-for-1. If Philly wants multiple picks, I don't want to give them a first round pick. And I think we can agree they're probably going to want multiple picks for AJ Brown. Like, I'm not giving them a first and a fourth for AJ Brown. Now, if it's just, hey, give us your first round, because I think Brown, like, I agree with Sapp that he is going to break down. I think he's got 3 good years left because he's 29. I think he'll give you 29, 30, 31, and at 32. Whereas like Diggs gave you a good season at age 32. I don't think you'd get that from Brown. So I think for 3 years, I would do it. But again, if it's a 1-for-1, I'm not giving up multiple picks, including a first rounder for him. And I think another piece of this, like you mentioned, Brian Thomas, Sam, I'd love him, but maybe there's another guy that's going to become available that we're not necessarily thinking of either around. Like when AJ Brown originally got traded, nobody thought he was available till the night of the draft when he actually got traded. So maybe something like that happens. And maybe Philly just wants to hang on to him till June anyway because they got a new offensive coordinator and they want to see if that meshes well, and they'll just keep him because that's a team that could go on another Super Bowl run that's really talented. So there's a lot of I'd be open to a first round pick if it's a 1-for-1. If they want multiple picks, though, I don't want to give up a first round pick for him, especially with the risk that your 2027 picks could be, in the top 20 or 25 of
And to your point, that's going to be a much better draft. in terms
Yeah,
of
especially
being a
at
more
receiver.
balanced draft, especially at the skill positions on offense. It'll be a better draft than this year. So I do think that should play a part in it, because if you finish 9-8, you're picking the middle of the first round. Again, I'm not giving up a pick in the 15 to 20 range for AJ Brown at this point. I'm just not doing it.
When you look at that position, there's always a malcontent or two around the league. Last year was George Pickens, who Pittsburgh got for Dallas got for a third round pick. I mean, is there a receiver out there that is going to just blow his fuse at some point because something happened in the offseason, the contract talks weren't right, whatever, and he wants out, and maybe you steal him for a third
No, I
round
don't
pick?
think so.
Yeah, because
Unless
Pickens.
that was somebody like a Puka Nakua who
Yeah,
all
no,
of a
he's
sudden
not going
doesn't want
anywhere.
to be
Yeah,
there anymore because he's not getting the bag yet. I mean, maybe, but
yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think that guy's out there. But I mean, Ayuk could potentially be had now. But
No
do you want
thanks.
that guy?
No
It's a
thanks.
headache. No
Yeah.
Yeah.
thanks. And
Yeah, well, like maybe one
people,
of those Detroit Lions receivers because they can't pay everybody there.
yeah,
I don't
maybe.
know.
Well,
Like,
they paid Williams though. It's
right.
those
So,
guys are paid. Yeah.
like, Cincinnati, they paid Chase and Higgins, but like, are they finally going to realize that you actually have to block and play defense to win? And maybe they'd be willing to move on from Higgins, even though they just signed him a year ago. Like, maybe something like that. But even as I'm saying this, like, I view those as pretty unlikely to happen, but those are the only scenarios I could maybe see kind of popping up where something like that could happen.
And I do think ultimately they will land AJ Brown. If he's really available, I do think that they're going to ultimately get him. It's just a matter of what are you comfortable with? In my view, I think it's going to be for a second round pick. I do think they're going to be willing to give up a second round pick and or something else, either a pick or a player. It could be a second round pick, a fourth round pick, and a Kayshon Boutte or a Pop Douglas. Who knows? But I do think he's ultimately going to be here. I think they want it to happen. He wants it to happen. I think the Eagles want to move on from that contract because they're going to have some cap issues potentially next year. So I think he ultimately ends up here. I just wouldn't do it for a first round pick. If they did it for a second, another pick and a player, fine. To your point, Lyons, and I think it's a good one. If you can get 3 good years out of AJ Brown, it's probably worth it. But I'm not doing it for a first round pick. Real quick before we wrap up here, I do want to bring up Christian Gonzalez, and I want to bring up something that has been bandied about, especially because we've seen recent trades happen involving cornerbacks. Would you consider trading him? We saw it happen during the season with the Jets trading Sauce Gardner to the Colts. We just saw it a couple of weeks ago with the Chiefs trading Trent McDuffie to the Rams. Would you consider trading Christian Gonzalez and not extending him and paying him?
Yeah, 3 first round picks minimum. That's it. Like, otherwise, because that's how good he is. Like, Sauce Gardner went for 2, and Gonzalez is better than him, and is going to be better, I think, over the long term. Like, I think Gonzalez. I don't know how you guys feel. I think he's a top 3 corner in the NFL, and he's still getting better. And he's a big game player, as we saw in the AFC Championship game in the Super Bowl, which we didn't know before this year because they hadn't been good. That's the guy you want to keep around. And we've seen, if you're going to win the Super Bowl, whether you want to look at the Patriots dynasty, whether you want to just look at recent Super Bowl champions, you got to have good secondary play. Specifically, you got to have at least one corner that you can trust to man up on guys and take them away. Almost every Super Bowl champ of the last 20 years has had a guy that fits that profile. That he's a guy like that. So you want Christian Gonzalez, you give me a minimum 3 first round picks. Otherwise, I'm extending them and I'm not talking to anyone.
I'm not trading him at all. I mean, again, 3 first round picks. Now you do go to the table and start negotiating, especially if you know that team might falter off and some of those are top 10 picks. But you drafted him, and in 3 years, you've developed him with, of course, his own help. But you've developed him into the top 3 cornerbacks in football, top 5, wherever you want to put him. He's an elite cornerback who we saw play his best games in the biggest moments. So why would you want to move on from someone? Again, it's about the contract. I get it. But the market seems to have been set, and he will probably reset the market. I'm guessing 4 years, 128 million with 100 million guaranteed. That's what it's going to call for. If you keep waiting to sign him, first of all, you're going to be dealing with a guy who may not be happy. But then a year from now, the market could be even higher. You mentioned T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. If the Bengals were a well-run organization, they would have signed those guys a year earlier for about $5 million less per year. but they waited and waited and waited, and it cost them more. That's what happens in this situation. So I would not trade him. 3 first-round picks, yeah, we do have to speak, because now you're talking about what you get back for pretty elite quarterbacks. But the player is arguably your best player. I mean, I know Drake May is your franchise quarterback, but the way in the postseason that Christian Gonzalez played, he stepped up marvelously, and it's one of the 5 most important positions in football: quarterback, left tackle, wide receiver, edge, and cornerback. And you've got a guy that 29, 30 other teams would love to have.
2 things. One, I 100% would trade him, and it wouldn't be for 3 first-round picks. I'd take 2. And 2, why do you need to sign him right now? I mean, at the most, you need to make a decision by May whether or not to pick up his 5th-year option. But why would you rush to pay him right now and set the market right now? You don't need to do that. I mean, you could play the long game with him. Why not? So he's going to be pissed.
I would
and may
sign
hold
him
out.
before
I get it.
the season. I would want him signed before the season, because I think
Yeah,
that
I wouldn't re-sign him this offseason.
I
I would play
would,
the
because
long game with him.
I think the market with him is only going to increase, and I think you've seen enough production to justify it. Like, I know some guys, when you get in the 5th-year option realm, you're like, are we really sure? Let's see. Like, I think with him, you've seen enough production at that position that it's worth it. And I think, I mean, we've seen, I know it's kind of silly, like Derek Stingley got $100,000 more than Surtain or whatever. Like, guys are incrementally setting the market, but I do think that's a position, especially with the salary cap and TV revenues continuing to balloon, you're only going to see that just get higher and higher and higher.
I just think ultimately, at the end of the day, for me, I play the long game with him, because you can pick up his 5th-year option in May. There's no need to re-sign him right now. You can wait it out, because you're going to have him another year regardless. You can have this conversation a year from now, because as much as people think you're going to be having this conversation a year from now with Drake May, you're not. That's the reality. The other thing is, and I always come back to, and I've been look, 2 weeks ago, I was more pro sign him now. And then I looked at some numbers, and then I saw the McDuffie trade. Then I thought about it, and I'm a firm believer in turning the roster over. I've always said this, that an NFL roster is like soil. If you want it to yield a crop, you got to keep turning it over, and that crop is winning a Super Bowl. And I think you win with young players, first and second contract guys. And I know he falls under both of those categories, but I'm not paying him $33 million a year. I don't think a cornerback is worth $33 to $35 million a year. I just don't. I think it's one of wide receiver and cornerback, in my opinion, are supremely overrated positions in football. You can get away with good players there, not great players. I'm not paying the guy $35 million a year. I'm just not. That's just me. Now, I know you guys disagree. I know that there'll be countless of people out there that will disagree with me, but I'm not looking to set a market here with the guy. I would move him if he's looking to set a market. I would take the 2 first-round picks and a player and say thanks for the memories, but he did a great job against Jackson Smith and Jigba in the Super Bowl. I will give him that. He erased him. But am I paying him $35 million, $33, $35 million a year on that performance? No, I'm not.
So you want to play out the course where you extend him for a 5th year. What do you do? Franchise tag him in the 6th year? So now you're playing that game.
I'd long play it with him.
You're not going to get a production out of him. You're just not.
Okay, then I trade him for the
then you trade him at that point. But now you start to trade an asset that's losing value, because all of a sudden he's malingering with a hamstring, or he's not playing at the same level.
There's countless examples, Sap, in the history of this league, where teams sign a guy too early and then it proves to be catastrophic for them because he's not the same player, because that injury you just mentioned happens to him or whatever else. I don't know. And Lyons makes a good point. The cap's going to keep going up, TV contracts, advertising, all that other stuff. Do I think he's a top 3 in the league? Yeah, absolutely. You can make the argument he's probably the best corner in the league. But if you're the Patriots, how many of these contracts do you want to give out? I pay the quarterback begrudgingly, because I think those guys are overpaid too. But I pay the quarterback. But outside of that, I'm not overpaying a receiver in a corner. I'm just not.
Yeah, I wouldn't overpay a receiver. I look at it as quarterback, left tackle, and corner. Like, those 3, I will pay a lot of money for those 3 positions. Also, defensive tackle, like a Milton Williams, like, I would pay that contract, because I think that's something that gets underrated. The numbers never back it up, but that makes a huge difference. Like, I wouldn't necessarily pay, $40 million a year for a great receiver. Like my ceiling at receiver is like 28 to 30 right now, if it's a really great player. Whereas corner, I'll go a little higher because, again, I just think it's harder to find a great corner, a truly great corner, than I think it is to have a great receiver, especially if you have a great quarterback Drake May made Kayshon Boutte look like a great receiver at times this year. No disrespect, but he's not, I think, truly a great player. Where to find a truly great corner, I think is a little more difficult.
It is.
I think this time next year, you're going to be hearing about contract negotiations with Drake May after just 3 years, because the top guys, that's what they do. After 3 years, you start to talk contract negotiations.
I think a lot of it will depend on how next season goes. I don't think
and I think, look, the fifth year option is extremely valuable, and I generally lean towards using that. I just think there are certain guys that are I think Christian Gonzalez is an exception to the fifth year option. I think Drake May, if he has a good season, will be an exception to that. But most guys, like whoever they drafted 31 this year, will probably be a fifth year option guy. Like, sure, most guys are fifth year option guys. I just think Gonzo is an exception to that. May could be. Maybe you have two guys on your roster that fit the bill.
All right, Lauren Gaudette checks back in. A couple minutes left, and I'm in the middle. I do agree with Sarianides that we're turning the roster over, but at the same time, you keep the best players and maybe trade on the third contract. Plus, look at the lack of production receiver Pats had the last 5 to 7 years. Yeah, no, look, Sap and I have argued back and forth about this because he overvalues receivers, and I don't. That's why the Cincinnati Bengals will never win a Super Bowl with breaks down Burrow and those two receivers, because you're putting your money into the wrong positions. It's one thing to pay Burrow. I get paying him, but maybe you pay Chase, but I wouldn't have paid both of those guys. But nonetheless, I think it goes back to, I'm not saying that Christian Gonzalez doesn't have value. In Lyons, I do agree with you. That is a harder position to develop a player and even find a player. I just think if you're the Patriots again, I don't think they want to set the market with him. I don't know this. No one's told me this. I don't have any intel. I just have a feeling that Vrabel is more like Belichick than we think. And I don't think he is going to be looking to set the market here. Now, set the market could be he gets $3 more million over the life of the contract. I think they'd go there with him. But if he wants 100, let's say he wants to come in at 130. I don't know if they go that high over 4 years. I really don't.
Well, 4 years, 128 million would be 32 million a year, which is going to be the market by the time you get to him. Again, if you keep procrastinating at that point, the numbers only go up. They just go up.
We're never going to agree on this, Sap, because I'm not paying the guy just because he's going to throw a hissy fit because I didn't pay him. That's just idiotic.
And I wouldn't pay him because he's going to have a tantrum either. But I think, too, if you pay him now, you can structure it in a way where when Drake May's extension hit, it doesn't hurt you as much. Like you're not paying, you're not having.
That is the benefit of paying him now.
Yeah, like you're not having $70 million tied up in two guys. Maybe you can front load Gonzos, and even Belichick. To your point, like he did set the market when he signed Stephon Gilmore as a free agent, and he did give Darrelle Revis and Brandon Browner free agent contracts. Revis for 1 year was a decent sized one.
He set the market with McCourty too.
And he set them, and granted, he let McCourty almost leave to the Giants and got him back. But yeah, he set the market for him. So I think, John, they'd be willing to set the market to a point. Kind of I'm agreeing with what you're saying, that if he wants $1 million more a year than McDuffie got, fine. If he wants $6 million more a year than McDuffie got,
that ain't gonna happen.
I don't think so. So I think they'd be willing to set the market to a point, but they would have a limit on doing it.
All right. Final thoughts here, gentlemen, before we wrap up another scintillating episode of Patriots Pulse.
Yeah, it was I think a good first week. I gave it a B. I think they upgraded, but this is a team. Again, we've talked about this. They've got some more free agent moves to make, maybe a big trade. They have the draft. Yes, I know they are in the Super Bowl, but they still have work to do on this roster to stay at that level. I think they did some of it this past week, but they got some more to go going forward.
I think going forward, you need to add another wide receiver and also an edge rusher for sure. Those are the two biggest needs right now on the team. And then depth pieces along the offensive line, need a swing tackle. Defensively, you need some help on the interior if you want to have more quality depth than you have an interior defensive lineman. Those be those areas. And I know maybe from the outside looking in, I still look at tight end as a need for this team. Not an urgent need, but a need nonetheless.
No, I agree. I think it's more of a need than people think. And I think when you look at the way they drafted last year, in many ways, that's a preview of what's to come moving forward with the way they draft. I think that they're going to identify a clear need in the first round. They're always going to draft. Belichick always talked about not drafting for need. I think they will draft for need. But I think from the second round on, it becomes more about player value and player availability and who's there and can they get great value at the pick. We saw it with Travion Henderson last year in the second round. I think you're going to see it again this year in the second round. If there's a player there that they really like, and it might not necessarily be at a position of need, they're going to go out and get that player if they am high on their board and they see a lot of value there. But they still have a lot of work to do. I think the draft is going to allow them, because of where this draft is strong up front, offensive tackle, edge, interior defensive tackle. It's really good. I think because it's a strong draft in those areas, I think that those are going to be their target areas in terms of how they fortify the roster. But gentlemen, great job as always. Great conversation, great debate. Always love doing the show with you guys, and let's do this again next week.
Look forward to
Sounds
it.
good. Sounds good.
All right. That'll do it for this week's episode of Patriots Pulse. For WEI's John Lyons, John Sapochetti, I'm John Sarianides. We will be back with you next week. Until then, have a great week.